Back in 2014, I found myself using the Uber app pretty often. For 12 long months, I couldn't legally drive because of some DUI charges. A reckless, stupid mistake that I'd come to regret more than once. There's this nightclub/bar in my town that I'd hit up with my friends on weekends whenever we felt like blowing off steam. If we were lucky enough to have a designated driver, I'd snag a ride home with them. But when we didn't, we'd just pull out our phones and grab an Uber instead. That night, though, I wasn't feeling too great. Something about the heavy air inside the club mixed with too many cheap shots just didn't sit right. So I bailed early, sometime between 1 and 2 in the morning. It was bitter cold out, too cold to even think about walking home. So I pulled up Uber on my phone. A nearby driver popped up, Alex. I gotta admit, the guy's profile picture immediately gave me the chills. He looked older, rough around the edges. He wasn't smiling at all, and a patchy gray goatee framed his mouth beneath a plain black beanie that shadowed most of his forehead. There was just something off about him, but he was only 2 miles away. I shrugged it off. I told myself it didn't really matter. The app said he drove a Chevy Malibu, which sounded decent enough. So I hit request and tucked my hands deep into my pockets, shivering a little on the curb outside the club. I waited on this weathered old bench near the front door, right next to the bouncer. The guy was built like a brick wall and just stood there motionless, arms folded tightly across his chest, occasionally puffing warm breath into the freezing air. About 5 minutes later, headlights swept over the front of the club, and a silver Chevy Malibu rolled to a slow stop by the curb. It looked like a 2003 or something, definitely not the nice, polished ride I'd imagined. The thing looked tired, with a faint rattling noise and a streak of grime trailing along the passenger side. Alex didn't bother honking. He didn't even nod or wave me over. He just sat there behind the wheel, engine idling low and rough. A little disappointed by the sight of that old beat-up car, I dragged myself off the bench and made my way over. Without a word, I opened the back door and slipped inside, the cold vinyl seat crackling beneath me as I pulled the door shut behind me. Right away, the air inside that car felt wrong. He didn't greet me. No hello, no handshake, no awkward chuckle to break the tension. He didn't even turn his head to glance at me in the rearview mirror. Instead, in this low, almost whispery voice that felt too quiet for the silence in the car, he asked, "Where you headed to?" I gave him my address, the words catching a little in my throat. Without another word, he shifted the car into drive, pulling us out onto Main Street. But something felt off immediately. We were heading down Main, yeah, but we were going in the wrong direction, away from where my house was. My place is the other way," I told him, trying to keep my voice casual, even though my pulse was already picking up. At the next intersection, he turned left, cutting sharply, and the car rocked a bit as it took the corner. Now we were drifting away from the main roads, slipping down quieter, darker residential streets. The streetlights were sparse here, leaving long stretches of shadow between the pools of pale light. And that's when I noticed he hadn't plugged my address into his phone. No map open, no GPS voice telling him which way to go. It was like he wasn't even planning on following the directions at all. A weird, crawling feeling settled in my stomach. I didn't know if he expected me to guide him, or if he was just ignoring me. The silence stretched out so thick that every small rattle in the old car felt amplified, echoing in my ears. To break the tension, and to feel like I had some control, I pulled out my own phone and typed my address into my maps, turning the volume up so the GPS voice could guide him. "Turn left down the next street," the GPS chirped calmly. But he didn't turn. He drove straight past it, the tires rolling over a pothole with a dull thump. I threw up a confused hand gesture, eyebrows raised, trying to keep my expression questioning instead of panicked. That's when he finally spoke again, his eyes still fixed on the road. "I just gotta make a quick stop. Don't worry, I'll give you a discount." His voice was calm, too calm, and it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Even though I was still a bit drunk, a cold wave of clarity washed through me right then. Every instinct in me screamed that something was wrong, something really bad. My eyes drifted toward the front of the car, scanning for any sign of where we were headed, and that's when I saw it. The glove box in the center console was slightly cracked open, and sticking out of it, angled just enough for me to see clearly under the dim glow of the dashboard lights, was the black grip of a handgun, right next to him, within easy reach. And in that moment, as the streetlights flickered past in slow, measured intervals, the world outside the window felt impossibly far away. By now, my brain was spinning, trying to figure out how I was going to get out of that car. My chest felt tight, and I could feel my heartbeat pulsing in my neck, each thump echoing like a warning. At the next red light, I moved my hand slowly, trying to keep the motion small as I reached for the door handle. I squeezed it, just enough to test it quietly, praying it would open without making a sound. It didn't budge. I tried again, a little harder, my palms starting to sweat against the cold metal. Nothing. That's when I realized why. The child lock was on. A cold wave of panic shot through me, and from that point forward, it was like my heart was on overdrive, hammering so hard that I could barely hear anything else over it. The car kept moving, rolling past empty intersections and quiet houses, and I watched helplessly as we drove further and further away from where I lived. We must have been 2 towns over by now, street signs unfamiliar, buildings spaced out and dark, the roads nearly empty except for us. I was getting desperate. Calling the cops felt like it would just push him over the edge, and with that handgun within his reach, I had no idea what he might do if he caught me. I tried to think clearly, forcing down the rising panic. My best option, I decided, would be to try and flick the child lock switch near the front seat, right next to him. If I could get it unlocked, I could jump out the next chance I got. But the thought of having to move closer to him made my skin crawl. I'd have to slide across the back seat, positioning myself behind him without him noticing. Every second felt like it was stretched thin, tension tightening in my chest like a wire ready to snap. I locked my eyes on him through the rearview mirror, watching for even the slightest flicker of attention in my direction. His gaze was fixed on the road, the occasional glow of streetlights reflecting off his eyes, which looked cold and empty under the shadow of his beanie. Slowly, carefully, I shifted my weight to the side, inching across the back seat. The upholstery made a faint crinkle under me, and I held my breath, freezing every time he adjusted his grip on the wheel or shifted in his seat. Finally, I managed to position myself directly behind him, my knees pressed against the back of his seat. He hadn't noticed. Now came the scariest part. I had to reach for the button up front, the one that would unlock the doors, and I'd have to do it at a red light before he could react or grab for that gun. Each traffic light we approached felt like a countdown in my head. We would drive under the dull glow, and every time the light stayed green, I felt the tension coil tighter, like something inside me was being wound up to the breaking point. Please, just turn yellow, I kept thinking, my eyes glued to the next light as it came into view, the world narrowing down to that small square of red I needed. Finally, one did. The light ahead flickered from green to yellow and then to red, the glow reflecting off the hood of the car as we slowed to a stop. This was it. He slowed the car as we approached an intersection, the kind that would usually be packed with honking cars and impatient drivers during the day. But now, under the cold, empty glow of the streetlights, it was almost deserted. A perfect escape point, if I could just move fast enough. The car rolled to a stop, the engine humming low, vibrating under the floor. I could feel the seconds ticking by, the pressure in my chest building, knowing that this light didn't stay red for long. I had to be quick. Across the intersection, a single car was waiting at the opposite light, a big Cadillac Escalade, its headlights cutting through the dark. Seeing it there made me feel a tiny bit safer, like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely alone in this moment. I swallowed hard, gathering every last ounce of courage I had, my hand trembling as I reached up toward the illuminated child lock button near his seat. My fingertips brushed against it. And suddenly, he jumped, his whole body jerking in the seat. "What the hell are you doing?" he screamed, the sound sharp and ragged, slicing through the silence like a blade. In that instant, his hand shot toward the glove box. Just like I feared, he was going for the gun. The glint of the weapon's handle caught the glow from the dashboard as he fumbled for it, and my pulse exploded in my ears. But my hand slammed down on the button. I heard the faint click as the doors unlocked, and without thinking, I ripped the handle and threw the door open. Cold air blasted against me as I lunged out of the car, stumbling onto the street. My shoes scraped against the rough pavement as I sprinted, adrenaline tearing through me, pushing me forward. I ran straight to the Escalade, slamming my palms against their windows, my breath fogging the glass as I yelled, "Help me! Please, help!" But the driver inside glanced at me, eyes wide, and then, without even rolling down the window, hit the gas and drove off, their taillights disappearing into the darkness. For a split second, the world felt like it was collapsing. But then I turned, and I saw that the Chevy Malibu was already gone, the red glow of its taillights shrinking down the block before vanishing around a corner. My legs felt weak, but I forced them to move, rushing toward the nearest building, a grocery store that was open 24 hours, its fluorescent lights buzzing and flickering above the entrance. I shoved the door open, the warmth and the sharp scent of produce hitting me all at once as I stumbled inside, panting, heart still thundering. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and called a taxi this time, not even considering Uber again. The weirdest part was, as I stood there in that store, I didn't feel drunk anymore. It was like the fear had burned it out of me, leaving me painfully, terrifyingly sober as I waited for the cab to show up. The ride home was a blur, the driver's soft radio and the hum of the tires on the road barely registering as I stared out the window, replaying every moment, every wrong turn, every second I spent in that car with him. When I got home, I reported the driver to Uber, explaining everything that happened. They told me they would escalate the situation to the authorities. It wasn't until a whole week later that a police officer finally knocked on my door, asking me questions, scribbling down notes in a small pad while I tried to keep my voice steady. And that was it. That was the end of it. I never found out what became of that guy. I never found out if they caught him or if he was out there picking up someone else in that same beat-up Chevy Malibu. But I do know one thing. I have never used Uber again since that night. Back when I was driving for Uber, I ran into all kinds of unpleasant people. Drunken groups of friends piling into my back seat on Saturday nights, reeking of cheap booze and cologne, shouting over each other and spilling fries everywhere. Then there were the people who would fake being handicapped just to try and squeeze a free ride out of me. But every once in a while, you'd get someone who was on a whole different level. A person you could only describe as a straight-up creep. I'd had a few of those, sure, but none of them even came close to a guy named Tom. It was a Friday night in December, the kind where the cold seeps into your bones the moment you step outside. The air sharp enough to sting your skin. I had nothing better to do that night, so I figured I'd head out and grab a few late-night pickups to make some extra cash. This was 2 years ago. I was only 18 at the time, still riding on that thin line between feeling invincible and having no idea how dangerous the world could actually be. My parents had spoiled me a bit, and I was driving around in a brand new Honda Accord. I was proud of it, still had that new car smell, the seats spotless, the dashboard lights crisp and bright in the dark. But I was also a pretty skinny 18-year-old, barely filling out my jacket. That's why my dad had insisted I keep a blade tucked away in the car, just in case. You never know what kind of nuts you're letting into your back seat, he'd told me, his eyes dead serious as he handed it to me. That night, a ride request popped up on my phone. A guy named Tom, a couple of miles away, right by a major shopping area. I didn't think much of it, just accepted the ride and started driving in his direction. When I pulled up in front of the shopping center, I immediately noticed a group of teenagers hanging around near the entrance. They were loud, bundled in hoodies, some smoking, others tossing around a crumpled soda can like it was a football. The way they were clustered together, half in shadow, half under the flickering parking lot lights, made them look like trouble. A wave of unease crept in, and I found myself silently hoping that this Tom guy wasn't part of that group. As I slowly eased the car forward, a few of them turned to look at me, their eyes following me as I rolled past, the engine humming quietly beneath the tension. One of them said something, and the others laughed, their voices carrying through the cold air. But I couldn't make out the words. The discomfort was enough that I decided not to risk it. I pressed down on the gas a little harder, putting some distance between me and that group, rolling deeper into the shopping center's parking lot, the shadows of the closed stores and the empty rows of parked cars swallowing me up as I searched for a safer spot to wait. I ended up doing 2 full laps around the entire parking lot, the glow of the streetlights flickering across the hood of my car as I scanned for any sign of him. The lot felt emptier every time I circled, the cold air outside making the windows fog slightly at the edges, the radio murmuring low in the background just to fill the silence. Then, in the driver's side mirror, I finally caught a glimpse of someone approaching from behind. His figure was slow, almost hesitant, moving under the dim lights, his shadow stretching across the cracked pavement. I rolled down my window, letting in a blast of cold air that made me shiver, and called out, "Tom?" A second later, a raspy voice answered back, "Yes." "Hop in," I told him, trying to sound casual, but the words felt awkward in the heavy, cold air. He didn't move. "Hop in," I repeated, a little louder this time, leaning out slightly to see him better. Still nothing. He just stood there, like he didn't hear me, or like he was thinking it over. "Hop in," I called out again, forcing a strained smile, trying to keep the situation normal even as my gut tightened. It was weird. All I was saying was "hop in" 3 times, clear as day, and he just stood there, making the whole situation feel off from the very start. Finally, the 4th time I called out, he seemed to get it. He gave a small nod, barely noticeable, and started walking around the back of my car, his footsteps slow and deliberate, shoes scraping against the pavement. He pulled the back door open and slid into the seat right behind me. Usually, people I picked up would sit diagonally, which I preferred. It felt safer that way, gave me space, let me see them out of the corner of my eye. But when someone chose to sit directly behind me, it always made me a little paranoid, especially when the person already gave off a weird vibe. And this guy definitely did. He looked older, easily in his late 40s, maybe even pushing 50, with lines on his face that the streetlights outside highlighted in quick flashes as we pulled away. His eyes were shadowed, hard to read in the rearview mirror. "Where to?" I asked, clearing my throat, trying to sound normal as I glanced back at him quickly. He rattled off an address, his voice low and rough, the kind of voice that told me instantly that he was a heavy smoker. The way he spoke, gravelly and thick, made the hairs on my arms stand up a little. I tapped the address into my phone, the screen's glow lighting up the inside of the car for a moment. As I did, I noticed the faint smell of cigarettes starting to fill the car, creeping in slowly, clinging to the warm air from the heater. It hadn't been there before, but now it was unmistakable. The address he gave me was 10 miles away, which was fine by me. A longer ride meant more money, and I tried to focus on that as I shifted the car into drive, pulling out of the lot, the tires crunching softly over scattered bits of gravel, while the unsettling feeling of him sitting directly behind me started to settle in like a weight on my shoulders. I tried making some small talk with him at first, just to break the thick silence that seemed to fill the car. It was something I always did with riders, even the weird ones, just to keep things feeling normal. But it didn't work out too well with Tom. Whenever I asked him a simple yes or no question, he would just mumble something, the words barely audible over the hum of the engine. Any other questions, like where he worked or how his night was going, just led to dry, dead-end responses, single words that felt like they were dragged out of him, making the silence that followed even heavier. I kept trying, hoping it would ease the tension. But then I asked him something so basic I can't even remember exactly what it was. And he didn't respond at all. He didn't even acknowledge that I'd spoken. Just silence, so complete that it made the soft hiss of the heater sound loud. That's when I stopped talking altogether. We weren't even halfway there yet, only about 5 miles into the 10-mile trip, and the rest of the ride stretched out in my mind like a tunnel I couldn't escape. By the time we hit the 6-mile mark, the air inside the car had shifted, tightening in a way that made me feel uneasy, like something was pressing down on my chest. I found myself gripping the steering wheel a little tighter, the leather warm and slick under my palms. My focus locked on the road, even though my mind was screaming at me to look in the rearview mirror. I didn't want to. I was afraid to. But the fear of not knowing was worse. So I risked a quick glance, just a half-second flick of my eyes upward, and the moment I did, my stomach dropped. He was staring at me. His eyes were locked on to the back of my head, cold and unblinking, catching the faint glow from the dashboard lights, making them look almost hollow in the dark. The second our eyes met, even for that fraction of a moment, I felt a jolt run through me, and before I could stop myself, my foot pressed down harder on the gas pedal. I just wanted this ride to be over. I needed it to be over. By the time we reached the 8-mile mark, the realization hit me that we were in the middle of nowhere. The street was narrow and dark, the kind of road you'd only use to cut through town quickly, lined on both sides by dense woods that loomed black and endless in the night. The few buildings we passed were scattered and dark, their windows empty, and there wasn't another car in sight. That was when suspicion started to creep in, cold and heavy. Where exactly was this address he gave me? Why did it feel like we were driving into nothing? While keeping one hand tight on the wheel, I reached for my phone, using my thumb to drag the map along the screen to see where we were heading. The screen glowed softly in the dark, illuminating my anxious expression in the reflection. The line on the map led to a small street that seemed to dead end into the woods with no other streets or houses nearby. It was just a single, lonely road ending in the middle of nowhere. My pulse started to pick up, pounding in my ears as the minutes ticked by, the dark trees rushing past the windows, and with every mile we drove deeper, the knot in my stomach grew tighter, twisting with the certainty that something wasn't right about where we were going. I shot another glance up at the mirror, hoping maybe he had stopped, but he hadn't. He was still watching me, his eyes locked on mine through the glass, unblinking, heavy, like he was studying every move I made. The silence in the car felt suffocating, wrapping around me like a cold, damp blanket, but I finally forced myself to speak, my voice sounding smaller than I wanted it to. "Hey, is that address you gave me? Is that your house?" For a moment, there was nothing. No sound except the tires rolling over the rough pavement, the low hum of the heater, and the pounding of my heart in my ears. I thought he was going to ignore me again, or maybe he hadn't heard me, or didn't want to hear me. But then, 5 long seconds later, he finally answered. Yes. Just that. One word, sharp and heavy, echoing in the confined space of the car. There was less than a mile left in the drive now, the miles on my phone ticking down, each one pulling me deeper into nowhere. We were still surrounded on both sides by thick, dark woods, branches twisting like claws into the night sky, with only the occasional, empty, lifeless building breaking up the darkness. I could feel my breathing getting shallow as I approached the dead-end street where the address supposedly was. My headlights cut through the darkness, searching for something, anything. A mailbox, a porch light, the shape of a house. But there was nothing, just pitch black. And in that darkness, I couldn't help but imagine every reason why he would want me out here, alone, so far away from anyone who could hear me if I screamed. As the street approached, I slowed the car, pretending I was just being cautious, but really, I was trying to see if anything would come into view. Some sign that this was a real place where people actually lived. But there was nothing. So, trying to keep my breathing steady, I casually kept driving, letting the street slip past, pretending like I hadn't seen it, hoping he wouldn't notice, that maybe I could just keep going and find somewhere safer. But he noticed. Instantly. He lurched forward in his seat, slamming his hands against the back of mine as he yelled, "Turn around!" His voice was sharp, cutting through me, and in that instant I felt like my life was hanging by a thread, like one wrong move would snap it. "I'm sorry, I missed it," I stammered, forcing my voice to stay calm, trying to hide the panic clawing up my throat. I pulled over and did a quick three-point turn, the car's tires crunching over the gravel at the side of the road, the headlights swinging wildly to illuminate the empty woods around us before facing back toward the dead-end street. As we approached it again, my hands felt slick on the steering wheel, but I managed to keep one hand steady while the other dug into the netting compartment on the side of my seat where I kept my blade. My fingers found it, cold and reassuring in my grip, and as quietly as I could, I flicked the blade open, the faint click drowned out by the sound of the tires on the pavement. I held it tight in my right hand, the metal pressing against my palm, ready just in case. I turned down the dead-end road, the tires crackling over loose gravel as the headlights swept across exactly what I expected. Nothing but thick trees pressing in on both sides, their branches tangled and black, swallowing what little light there was. I kept driving, slow now, my eyes darting between the road and the rearview mirror, feeling every second stretch out painfully as I made it to the very end of the road. There wasn't a single house, not even the shell of a building, just empty darkness and the skeletal outlines of trees crowding in from every angle. Every instinct in me was screaming that something was about to go down, my pulse pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips, each breath shaky as I tried to physically and mentally brace for whatever was coming. And then, in a voice so soft it barely felt real, he spoke. "Thanks for the ride." I wasn't even thinking about the fare anymore. Money was the last thing on my mind as he reached for the door handle, the sound of it popping open sharp in the cold air. But before stepping out, he paused. "Could you get out of the car for a second? I need help carrying my bag. I have a bad back." Bag? My mind froze for a split second, replaying every moment from when I picked him up, and I knew he didn't have a bag. He hadn't come in with one, and there was nothing in the back seat with him now. I forced out a reply, my voice cracking with fear, the words trembling as they came out. Yeah, sure. Let yourself out, and I'll help you in a sec." The shakiness in my voice was obvious, and I knew he could hear it too. What happened next, I never could have imagined. All of a sudden, I felt it, a sharp, crushing pressure on my neck, cutting off my breath. For a split second, I couldn't even process what was happening, my vision blurring as my hands shot up to my throat. He was choking me from the back seat. His grip was tight, fingers digging in, squeezing, and I could hear his heavy breathing as he pulled me back against the seat, the world narrowing down to the panic flooding my mind and the desperate need for air. Instinct took over. My right hand shot down to the blade I still had, clenching it so hard my knuckles hurt, and without even thinking, I twisted around and drove the blade into his left arm. His scream tore through the car, sharp and ragged, echoing in the small space as his grip loosened instantly from my neck. He yanked his hands back, falling out of the car and onto the street with a heavy thud, his scream turning into a guttural groan of pain as he hit the ground. I didn't wait. I yanked the car into gear, spun it around so fast the tires squealed against the pavement and floored it, the engine roaring as I sped down that dark, empty road, trees whipping past in a blur as I pushed the car faster, desperate to put as much distance between me and him as possible. I didn't stop until I reached a busy road, the glow of headlights and streetlights ahead feeling like the first breath of air after nearly drowning. And I didn't call the cops. I was too shaken, too scared to think about anything except getting home, shutting the door behind me, and trying to convince myself that I was safe. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I could barely keep my hands from shaking, and all I wanted was to crawl into bed, close my eyes, and forget any of it had ever happened. Needless to say, that was the last time I ever drove for Uber. After that night, I was done for good.